We are in Revelation 17. We will be looking at Revelation 17 and 18. Chapter 17 and 18 can be divided into two main thoughts. Chapter 17 would be the destroyer, and in chapter 18, the destroyee. So in chapter 17, we read about the one that will destroy the city, Babylon the Great. Fallen is Babylon. Now we're going to divide this particular chapter into 7 divisions, break it down into smaller divisions, in other words. We're going to be looking at the various cries. There are 7 of those. I call your attention to the fact that whenever you outline anything in the Bible, any verse, any chapter, any book, it is your outline. Others may outline it different. It doesn't mean that they're wrong and you're right and they're wrong or anything like that. It just means you're emphasizing something different than somebody else. Now, if God were to give us an outline, then his outline is absolutely correct. However, we're now looking at the 7 cries. Cry number 1 is found in chapter 17, verses 1 through 6, the cry of invitation, the call to witnesses to see what's going to happen. Then, when you get to verse 7 through verse 18, you have the second cry, the cry of wonder. The angel cries out, "Wherefore didst thou wonder?" So he's transitioning from the idea of silent shock that's going in John's mind in words to a divine explanation of what John sees. Then when we turn to chapter 18 and we read of the one being destroyed, we hear in chapter 18, 1 through 3, the cry of proclamation, a thunderous declaration of a completed spiritual fact. Fallen is Babylon. In that same chapter, starting in verse 4 through verse 8, we see the 4th division over all of the 2 chapters, the cry of separation, the command to the saints, "Come ye out from among her." We've heard that before, especially in Ephesians and Corinthians. Looking at chapter 18, verse 9 through verse 19, we have the cry of lamentation, the cry of the kings, the cry of the merchants, and the cry of the shipmasters, and they too are called merchants within the section. We then have the cry of rejoicing beginning in verse 20. And this is just the opposite of what the kings and the merchants were doing. Their crying was mourning, lamentation, wailing. On the other hand, you have celebration in verse 20. In chapter 18, verse 21 through 24, you have the cry of finality. Now let's look a little deeper at those 7 cries. Cry number 1, chapter 17, verse 1. This is the beckoning cry. It sets the stage for the unveiling of the great harlot as well as the beast. Here he says in verse 1, and we have read this repeatedly in chapter 16, and again in chapter 15, and here it is. There came one of the 7 angels that had the 7 bowls and spake unto me, saying, Come hither, I will show thee the judgment, the condemnation, the sentence of the great harlot that sitteth upon the many waters. We found out that the many waters would be the nations, and we'll see it again a little later, the peoples, the nations, the languages. We also found out that this harlot is sitting upon the beast. She's sitting upon all 3 of those. It depends on which aspect you're looking at. Verse 2. with whom the kings of the earth committeth fornication, and they that dwell in the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So John has repeated himself. I said repeatedly, and have been saying, he's talking about the harlot's fornication. That means she was faithful at one time. That tells you who the harlot is. Furthermore, she would make others drunk with her wine of fornication. We'll see that in just a minute. Verse 3, he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. I saw a woman sitting upon a scarlet-colored beast. The beast is full of names of blasphemy. I'm the one that added the words, the beast is full of names. I wanted you to see the distinction. The beast having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman, verse 4, was arrayed in purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stone and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations. That's who she is. Even, and he tells you what he means, even the unclean things of her fornication. Fornication does not exclude adultery. The word fornication includes the idea of adultery. Verse 5, upon her forehead a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. What an influence. What a horrible influence. I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints, with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered with a great wonder. And then in verse 7, he goes into that wondering, and the angel says, I'm going to tell you. But first of all, we take notice in verse 3 and 4 that she is decked out. The harlot is decked out. The beast is supporting her, at least for the moment. We find out later the beast hates her. Therefore, the harlot cannot be the beast. The beast is Rome. Rome cannot be the harlot. We underline and detail her abominations. Her abominations, number 1, would be abandoning loyalty. She's unfaithful. She is a harlot. She has committed fornication. We saw that a number of times. We would see it with verse 2. We would see it with verse 5. What?
Got a space right there.
Yukon, do you still have me? Thumbs up. What? We're now looking at detailing her abominations. We've covered one of them with a second one. You will take notice in verse 5, her arrogant presumption of divine favor, though she's rebellious. You will see that she is Babylon the Great. We take notice of a third detail of her abomination. She has allegiances with the pagan political nations. She has made them to drink with her wine of abominations. And then in verse 6, you see the abomination of afflicting the righteous. We took notice of chapter 11 where John nails it that the city that he's talking about is where our Lord was crucified. We took notice last week over and over again, passages by Jesus, Luke 11, that he referred to the destruction of Jerusalem and bringing judgment upon Israel because of her Israel, the nation of Israel, pursuing, afflicting, torturing, hurting the Christians in the first century. All you have to do is look at chapter 3 of Acts, 4, 5, and the book of Acts, 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, and so forth. But we continue on. So our first thought, the cry of condemnation, the call to the witnesses, see what she's done, the crimes. We're now in chapter 17, verse 7 through verse 18, the cry of wonder. John wondered. And so the angel said, verse 7, wherefore didst thou wonder? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman. It is a mystery. Let me stop just a moment. When you have a mystery book, novel, turn to the last page and you find out who the killer is. It's revealed. What God is doing in this particular case, he's got a mystery, but not in the sense of a mystery book. But I'm just using that to tell you, with a mystery book, even with that and using that type of definition of the word, we still know what happened when we read the end of the book. Well, in a figure, we are able to read the end of the book, but we can figure it out with the rest of the book as well. Because the mystery of God is the schema of God. Schema is not a bad word. It's the plan of God against his enemies, which would be Satan and the dominions. I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her, which hath the 7 heads and the 10 horns. He just now told you what the beast looks like. 7 heads, 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest is not, and is about to come out of the abyss and go into perdition. The abyss is not perdition. If you come out of one and you go into it, you're going right back where you came from. But perdition and the abyss are not the same. Though I've repeatedly called attention to commentators' concept of the abyss in chapter 9 of the book of Revelation. They think it is perdition or a parallel universe with perdition. They that dwell on the earth shall wonder, they whose name hath not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast, how that he was, is not, and shall to come. They're going to wonder how it is that this beast with 7 heads was, is not, and is to come. He's going to tell us what he means. I will leave you my interpretation of that and see if it fits. At the time that John wrote this, the ruler was Nero. Nero is number 6 in the emperors, in the Caesars of Rome, the beast. 5 have died, and we could name them, but we're not going to. Don't have time, really. And Nero is number 6. So he says, the beast that thou sawest is not, and is about to come out of the abyss. And, verse 9, here is the mind that hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth, and they are 7 kings. Let me stop right there, because he's going to go into these 7. I just mentioned to you the 7 are the Caesars of Rome. 5 have died, 1 now is, and 1 will come again. He tells us that the 7 heads are 7 mountains, and they are 7 kings. The normal interpretation is this. When John speaks of the 7 heads and then says there's 7 mountains, that's the 7 hills of Rome. It is not. Not going to hurt if it is, but it is not. And then he adds to it and he said, the 7 heads are 7 kings. I'm going to suggest to you that if you take that figure of speech, you're going to make a figure of speech confusing. How can a single phrase, figure of speech, mean 2 things at the same time? It never has. But what God can do is double up on that figure, and that's what he's done. Mountain in this text would simply be power. The heads have power. So he's looking at the 7 heads, 7 kings, 7 mountains from 2 basic aspects. They are kings and they have power. Majestic, mountain, magnificent, sovereign. That's a Caesar. That's in contrast here in a minute to the 10 kings, the 10 kings who haven't been given power yet. That's my judgment on that passage. We now look at verse 10 and we continue on. And it says, the 5 are fallen. The 5 kings, the 5 Caesars have fallen. The one is Nero was alive at that time, and the other is not yet come. That takes care of the 7. When he cometh, he must continue a little while. Let me emphasize, if I may, my interpretation of a little while. Well, Ron, that means not very long. It's going to be short. He's not going to be an emperor very long. No. From the book of Revelation standpoint, 1,000 years, a little while, those things are simply indicating not a length of time. Well, it's very clear. It says it's a figure of speech. You can agree or not agree. But when we get to chapter 20 and Satan is loose for a little while, for a season, it will help us to understand that figure of speech simply means, here it is, in relationship to blessing and cursing or hurting. It's a little while. You can take 2 Corinthians chapter 4, 17 and 18. You can take Romans chapter 8, verse 17, 18, and you see that hurting, affliction, destruction against the church and the people of God, the saints, is looked at as a little while in comparison to the great blessings. Thus, the great blessings are like 1,000 years, whereas the little season, in comparison to hurt, is temporary. The beast that was and is not is himself an 8th and is of the 7, and he goeth into perdition. I will point this out before we go any further. The fact is, the end of the novel is this: perdition for the beast. But it's awful hard to determine what he means, because he's just said there are 7 heads, and then he says, and there's an 8th. My judgment is that the 8th is not 8 in sequence of the 7. What did that mean? When you go through 1 through 6, you have a sequence of Caesars from Julius Caesar to Nero. Augustus Caesar, which was number 2 in that sequence, was the king or the emperor that was sitting on the throne in Rome when Jesus was born. Here, Nero is the one that is on the throne. He's number 6. They are in sequence. And with the 7 heads, the 7th head, all John is conveying is those sequences are going to continue. They're not going to stop. Well, then why does he say the eighth in separation from the seven? Here's why, in my judgment. Because he wants you to understand, I'm not giving you a history lesson. That's what he wants you to understand. I'm giving you a judgment lesson. And the fact is, the Caesar that's going to be just like Nero is coming on the scene again. He's the eighth. By the way, that eighth Caesar would be the son of Vespasian, who was Caesar, who is the brother of Titus, who was Caesar, and Domitian. Domitian was, in my judgment, the eighth, and he reinstituted the persecution against Christians in the 90s AD. Verse 12. He is still describing to us the beast. And the 10 horns that thou sawest are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority as kings with the beast, alongside the beast, for 1 hour. He just told you these 10 kings are contemporaneous with the beast. We just found out that the beast is Rome with Nero as its head, as its emperor. Ron, we didn't find that out. That's just your interpretation. Yeah. That's Ron's interpretation. And that's what I just found out. And it's all historical. Well, who are the 10 kings? We covered it last week. You may remember that we took a quote from Josephus that pointed out that Jerusalem ruleth over the other 10 provinces who had kings. They, the 10, turn against Israel. So he's introducing the 10 horns as simply those 10 kings who were ruling in the provinces, the sections of Israel as it's divided up. Now you can read about that sectioning in the book of Josephus, who Josephus, being a Jew and born, I think it was 37 AD, and gave his history around 90 AD of the fall of Jerusalem. He lived through it. He saw it. He looked at it. He beheld it as it occurred in 70 AD. And he's telling you that whenever you look around in 70 AD and before, you're going to see 10 kings who do not have a kingdom. They just rule with authority. That is in relationship to Rome. That's my interpretation. We're in verse 13. We're continuing the wonder being exposed. These have one mind. They give their power and authority unto the beast. They're all now gathered together against. Verse 14, these shall war against the Lamb. The Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords, King of kings. They also shall overcome that are with him, called, chosen, and faithful. Right in the middle of everything. This is important. Right in the middle of everything. You see it time and time again. Chapter 13, verse 14. Right in the middle of everything. I mean, the figures are horrible. Absolute destruction and might and terror. And right in the middle of it, he says, they'll war against the Lamb. And they will war. Watch this. There are two encouraging words. They will war against the followers of the Lamb, but the followers of the Lamb and the Lamb will overcome. That beast is not mighty enough. Overcome in what way? Physically? Well, they will win out physically overall when everything's said and done, but they are going to reap horrible and terrible execution of saints in the first century. Furthermore, I want you to see a second encouraging thought. They that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. Those are encouraging words. Verse 15. And the angel, which was introduced in verse 7, saith unto me, John, the waters which thou sawest, where the harlot sitteth, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues, Gentiles. And the 10 horns which thou sawest, and the beast, these shall hate the harlot, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and shall burn her utterly with fire. We covered this last week. You cannot say that's wrong. How come I can't say that's wrong? It's easy for me to say, that's wrong. No, Rome has never been utterly burnt with fire. Never. Not even in 66 AD when Nero set Rome on fire. Furthermore, they shall make her desolate. In chapter 18, we're going to see she doesn't get out of that. Rome still exists. Those who believe that chapter 17, that the harlot, the city, is Rome, that's the distinction I'm making now. Rome is the beast, the harlot is Israel, the nation of Israel. And what he's saying in this text is that they shall hate, the beast shall hate the harlot. If the harlot is Rome and the beast is Rome, then Rome is hating Rome and making Rome herself desolate. Therefore, the harlot is Israel, the nation of Israel. Verse 17, there's more too, but we go further. For God did put in their hearts to do his mind. Question. In the text, where does it say how God put it in their hearts to do this? In the chapter, where does it say how God put it in their hearts? In the book of Revelation, does it tell you how? In the Bible, does it tell you how? Yes. This morning, a young lady at the house walked by her knucklehead husband. The knucklehead husband had a tool in his hand. He, with that tool, struck her. She did not turn around and give him a black eye. It was not a devastating thud. It was a tap. And the knucklehead immediately said, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. Well, then who did? This instrument that I have in my hand. Then you did it. Okay. God does not have to reach down and thump with his hand, with his might, directly on the spirit of a human being or anything else. He can use instruments. And he's still the source of the thumping. He's still the source of the information. He's still the source, in one sense, not in all senses, the one who produced the outcome. Tried to avoid it, but some people simply turn against Pharaoh, turn against what he's trying to do to help Pharaoh even. And he says, and to give their kingdom unto the beast until the words of God should be accomplished. Even in the midst of saying God did it, he says the words of God should be accomplished. God accomplishes it through words. We're now looking at verse 18. And the woman whom thou sawest is the great city. First time he said that. Pardon me, in this chapter, in this section. The woman whom thou sawest is the great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. We talked about who those kings are. I'm not going to repeat it, but if you go back, I think, to last week's lesson and a few others, you will hear me point out, just like I did earlier in this lesson, that Rome was the royal, quote, royal city. That's what Josephus called her, because she ruled over 10 provinces. She ruled over the kings in that area and in that time. That's all that means. We now turn to chapter 18, and we have no time left. Hey, I get docked my salary whenever I go too long. If I quit a minute early, I get my salary. What is your salary, Ron? 0. And those who pay me will add zeros to that. They think it's a wonderful relationship and connection. Well, I thought I was going to get through chapter 18. I will simply call your attention to this. What you have in chapter 18 is the execution of judgment on the great harlot, and the great harlot is the city. The city is the city of Jerusalem and the nation of Israel. And in verse 3, he tells you again why. He would cry out for them to come out from among them. There would be great lamentation. I would suggest this to you if you want to if you want to do this exercise. In chapter 18, verses 9 through 19, the cry of lamentation. And it starts this way. The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived wantonly with her shall weep and wail over her. Now, if you will take you a pencil where you can erase, I use new paper with my verses written down. It's easier. I just color it, color coded. Well, thank you, Ron. We appreciate that. Well, anyway, if you will color code, if you will go through and color code, underline every time you see the word that is synonymous with cry, wail, weep, and so forth. Not all of the cries are weeping. You will see in this chapter, verse 9, the kings of the earth. You will see in this chapter, verse 11, the merchants of the earth. You will see in verse 15, the merchants of these things. But look at verse 17. It's the shipbuilder that he's talking about in verse 15. Verse 20, rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye saints, and ye apostles, and ye prophets, for God hath judged your judgment on her. Chapter 19, verses 1 through 3, hallelujah. Salvation and glory and power belong to our God, for true and righteous are his judgments, for he hath judged the great harlot. Verse 3, and the second time they cry and say, hallelujah.